Hi everyone. We're so excited to have you here today at this panel where we're going to talk about AI and business journalism. So I'm Jeff Coughlin. I'm a senior editor at Forbes where I cover financial services and fintech, and I'm also co-chair of the Business Journalism Task Force of the NAHJ, National Association of Business Journalists. And just to say a little bit about that, we're a task force that where we really aim to support Latino business journalists with trainings and webinars like this and community and networking events, et cetera. So we encourage people to get involved and join us if you're interested. And this panel came about because Jake Bassel from who's co-chair of the SABEW Education Committee reached out and he's here with us obviously and said, "Hey, you want to collaborate on another panel? We did one a year ago, and and how about we talk about AI?" So that's how this came about. And now I'll turn it over to Jake to introduce himself.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jake Batzel. I'm the O'Neill Chair in Business Journalism here at Southern Methodist University in Dallas, and I do chair the SABEW Education Committee. We are really excited to be partnering again with the NAHJ Business Journalism Task Force on our second combined training webinar. This is an incredible lineup of panelists. I already learned a ton of tips from our prep call last week that I can't wait to share with my students here at SMU. And actually, I have class starting in about 20 minutes, and my students are going to be tuning in to the webinar. So they're going to be learning right away from this stellar lineup of panelists. But the SABEW Education Committee, we're a lot of former journalists who now teach business journalism at universities across the country. We meet monthly, and one of our missions is to put together training opportunities like this for student journalists and early career journalists. So if you're an educator or a student interested in getting more involved with SABEW or our education committee, you can reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat or also leave it on a Google Doc that we're going to be sharing a little bit later. We have you're free to browse our growing library of educational resources for SABEW members, including tip sheets, syllabi for business journalism courses, and more at sabew.org/resources. That'll be on the Google Doc as well. And we're still in the early bird registration phase for SABEW 26, the annual conference in Philadelphia, which is happening May 7th through 9th, where you can train up over 3 days, packed with more business-focused sessions like this. I know Maga was on one of the panels last year and was wonderful, and I learned a lot from her then in DC. So I'll include links with more about all this in the Google Doc that will circulate later to everyone participating today. And thanks so much for joining us, and I look forward to learning from our panelists.
Thanks, Jake. Now I'll turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. Isabella, why don't you start?
Hi, everyone. My name is Isabela Cota. I am a Mexican journalist. I currently live and work in Mexico City for the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. I actually have a master's in business and financial journalism out of City University London. And so prior to joining ICIJ, which was in late 2024, I worked as a business reporter for Reuters, Bloomberg News, El País as well, uncovering even corruption and wrongdoing from the business sector. And I'm very happy to be here.
Mago, how about you next?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Mago Torres, like Isabela. I'm also from Mexico, and I'm based in the Bay Area. I am currently a trainer for the Google News Initiative, where I go to newsrooms and also do a lot of training online and in person on mostly AI tools or and tools that can be very helpful for journalists. And before joining the Google News Initiative, I was a data editor and data investigative reporter for different organizations like the Examination, the Latin American Center for Investigative Reporting. I also work with ICIJ and have worked with different long form investigations that require a lot of documents. So always talking about new tools is very exciting to what can make our work faster and without compromising the quality. And yeah, I will stop there and pass it to Sebastian.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sebastian Herrera. I was born in Bogota, Colombia. I grew up in Texas. I spent a lot of time in local newspapers there at the Houston Chronicle, at the Austin American Statesman. At the Statesman, I covered tech, and then I got an opportunity to come out here to the Bay Area and cover technology for the Wall Street Journal. I wrote about Amazon.com for years, and now I'm covering more Microsoft, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, enterprise software companies like Oracle. I write about AI a lot. And so I'm happy to be here and talk a little bit about how I use it in my own workflows. So thank you, everybody, for joining.
Great, thanks so much. We're going to dive into questions for everyone in the audience. If you have questions you want to submit, please do so through the Q&A, and we'll leave time at the end to answer submitted questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. So to kick us off here, I just wanted to ask everyone how you currently use AI in your business reporting. And let's start, Sebastian, let's start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. So, like I mentioned, I cover enterprise technology, and one of the companies I cover is Oracle. And it's kind of funny for me to be doing this panel because if you had asked me a year ago how I used AI in my own reporting, I didn't really. Like I wrote about AI. I sort of played around a little bit with tools like ChatGPT or Gemini because I had to be knowledgeable in my reporting, but it wasn't really present in my workflow. And that sort of changed in a big way for me in the fall because basically what happened was I was covering Oracle's earnings, and they had this huge blowout earnings report because they essentially had signed like a really big deal, a big cloud computing deal with OpenAI, and it sent their shares through the roof. Like in a couple of days, it was like the most their shares had gained since like the 90s or something like that. Um, so my editors really wanted me to write about Larry Ellison, who's this tech mogul who owns or founded Oracle, and he owns still like 40% of the company. And a lot of people were very curious about, we haven't heard about Larry Ellison in a long time, but here Oracle is doing great. So they wanted me to turn around this profile of him, and they wanted me to do it like really fast, like in like 2-3 days. Which is obviously like a really quick turnaround for a profile. And so my editor actually is the one that brought up, hey, you should use Notebook LM to put a bunch of your notes in there. And I hadn't really used it up until then. And for those unfamiliar with Notebook LM, it's basically this tool by Google where it's really like a customized version of Gemini in the sense that it's only grabbing from what you put into it, and hence the notebook name. And so you can throw a bunch of stuff in there like YouTube clips or other articles where people have been mentioned. And so Larry Ellison, who has had a lot of writings about him, there's other profiles of him present on the web. You can obviously throw your own notes in there and your own quotes that you're gathering, and you sort of form this list of notes, and then you can just start asking away at the Notebook LM, like different questions about what you're searching. So, for example, with this Larry Ellison profile, as I was scrambling to put it together, and I had never written about Larry Ellison, so I was kind of somewhat learning on the go. I started asking things like, what has Larry Ellison said about Bill Gates, because they were big rivals back in the day. And it sort of, it found like this quote from a YouTube video that it had transcribed. Or I asked, what has Larry Ellison said about running a company into his 80s, because he's in his 80s and he's still, largely running Oracle. And it sort of just, spits answers back at you. And it basically it really sped up the reporting process for me in this profile that I had to write. I was able to put it together pretty efficiently using my own research, my own quotes, with a lot of other background that I had gathered and stuff that it was pulling from, from, for example, YouTube clips. And because it was a scenario where like I didn't have a chance to talk to Larry Ellison for this profile. It was like too quick of a turnaround. So I had to, in some cases, rely on things he had said, back in 2007, in an interview and things like that. So after that, I kind of, became a believer of using Notebook LM and, in different ways. And I think it's been especially helpful for me in breaking news situations or times where I'm like, really having to scramble and find quotes in my own notes, that I'm asking it to find, or transcription services too. Like it transcribes interviews pretty well, I found. And so for me, Notebook LM has been like a really, useful tool in terms of using Gen AI in my own reporting. And I'll stop there.
Great, thanks. Isabella, how about you? How do you use AI in your reporting?
So I was a generative AI skeptic for a while. And now I feel a little bit more confident, but I use it very cautiously. So a lot of what we do at ICIJ has to be groundbreaking, right? And we do like large scale investigations. And most of them are business investigations. Like if you think of the Panama Papers, that was a giant business project because we're talking about the use of offshore companies, et cetera. So a big part of how I use it is it helps me find out what there is out there already. Like if I use very specific prompts, I ask Gemini, which is the tool that I use, the pro version of Gemini. I ask Gemini to give me only journalistic sources, only legacy sources. I asked Gemini to exclude any kind of social media. I mean, unless it's required, but most of the time. And it helps me very quickly find what journalistic projects or investigations there are out there already that could basically make our work less attractive. And so it's like an initial filter. That way it's super, super efficient. I have tried to use it for fact checking, and I have had mixed experiences because the AI is still not to the point where it can be fully trusted, even if the prompts are very specific. It's given me answers that are not real. For example, like one example is I uploaded a video and said, "Can you tell me exactly where in this video this source says this thing?" And it gave me a quote that was not in the video, for example. So I highly recommend that if you're going to use it for fact checking, you ask for the sources and you go individually into each of the sources to make sure that it's giving you the right thing. Another way I use it, because I on top of my work at ICIJ, I still collaborate for a TV network here in Mexico once a week, and I speak about the economy, is I upload a lot of public data, whether it has to do with economic indicators or even business sector data indicator, manufacturing, that kind of stuff. I uploaded onto Canvas, which is also a Gemini feature, and you can ask questions to the database in a natural human language, and it helps you find trends or anomalies or spikes or flows of things that are happening in a specific sector, business sector, that have turned out really good business stories. That's just one way that it helps, like if you learn to do this. I also obviously use it for transcripts. Pinpoint is a big one that I use. I use DeepL for translations, which is very big part of what I do because I work in English, but my reporting is in Spanish most of the time. So yeah, I guess I went from skeptic to heavy user with different precautions that I take that we can talk about later, just to be safe.
Yes, absolutely. And just one follow-up, Isabella, on Canvas. How is Canvas different than using like a deep research function on Gemini or ChatGPT? How is Canvas different?
That's a very good question because I guess Canvas, there's a bit of overlap in between Notebook LM, for example, which is another tool that I use a lot where you upload your own sources, and Canvas. I have just found that when it comes to specific data sets, Canvas just gives me more accurate answers when I ask the data set, because I find that Notebook LM mixes the sources. And so it can give you an answer that is not specific to the data set that you are uploading as one of the sources. And so it's just, I believe, and Mago will be able to tell us more, but I believe that as these tools evolve, we're going to get more specific tools for each thing. And at the moment, the tools that were being offered have some overlap and some functionality that is kind of similar, in my experience at least.
Okay. Margot, how about you?
Yeah, so for the almost last year, I have been like my role has been teaching the tools. So I don't think I can fully answer like how am I using generative AI for the reporting. I would say that one of the features that I like the most about generative AI is what Isabel and Sebastian have shared, that is document analysis. I work on long investigations like Panama Papers, Pandora Papers, and like always like the entity extraction, like extracting entities and just like trying to find that information very quickly. Just been able to do it with Pinpoint or with Notebook LM, the tools that are already have been mentioned is one. Before I have used it also to work with code and trying to like either like Gemini embedded in on spreadsheets if that's a way that I want to work, or just like trying to find solutions on the code that is not working, or different tools in data journalism that also have a generative AI embedded that can help you to work with your graphics, etc. For example, there was this tool, Observable, that was for creating visualizations. But I think like right now, the way I see it, and from the training that I do and what I am experiencing with journalism in North America, is just the need of doing like but it has been mentioned already, but just like deep research, like when you have a generative AI assistant that can go and do deep research for you. There is a feature that is within Gemini. There's a Canva that has been already mentioned, that you can interact and also is building, and you can edit as on the go, and you can sometimes produce specific editorial products within Canvas and Notebook LM. And in November, I was at a conference. I haven't done it, but I do want to mention this. But I found it so brilliant. These young journalists it was at the Global Investigative Journalism Conference that were mentioning that one way that they were using Notebook LM, the audio overviews of Notebook LM, is that when they have to go through a lot of trying to create audio overviews of some of the sources that they had to review and start listening to them as podcasts if they were commuting. And I thought there was just like young people like taking advantage of these tools and trying to say like, I need to prepare for my reporting and I can do it while I'm like commuting. And sometimes it's very simple things, but just like that can facilitate the process of the reporting. Yeah, I'll stop there.
And Notebook LM is free, right? I don't know if it's, maybe there are more features in the paid business version, but Notebook LM is free.
Yeah, I would say features and capacity. All the information is public. What we can do when we share these sources later this session, I can share various links where people can check like the different types of depending on the plan that you have, what kind of features or what kind of accessibility you have. And I will also happy to share my email if anyone wants to be in contact and want to do like a specific type of training for your newsroom. I also can do that.
Great.
Pinpoint is Pinpoint has it's fully free, and the only thing is if you don't have access to Pinpoint, when you sign in, on top of the page, it's going to see early access to AI features. So if you want to have early access to those AI features, you have to opt in. Okay. My recommendation will be just like when you when you do that, there's a link to pinpoint, be sure that you are accessing those. And one final thing that I want to mention, sorry, it's like this overlap of the tools is totally real. And I think like there's something really, I'm a little bit cheesy in the way I talk, but I think it's something really beautiful about the possibilities of the different tools, because I think that we all come in doing the type of reporting, depending on, like, from different places, right? Like maybe I want to use generative AI to discover a new topic because I'm completely new on this. Maybe I want to be able to do a quick analysis of a data set, of finding these golden nuggets within the data, or finding or navigating a large data set of documents, or navigating a smaller but very specific set of documents. And all of this is just like the tools. In my experience, I cannot answer like when they are going to separate. I think that what we're going to see is just like these like constant overlap, but I think it's just also because the capacities that give us as users, I think, like many possibilities of how we want to interact with the tools, and for what, and understanding what exactly to start just like understanding what is exactly the need, and what a specific tool can provide depending on what I have to do, if that makes sense.
I agree with that. We're in a time right now where there's a lot of companies trying to provide solutions, and I think as time passes on, even just within this next 12 months, we'll start to see sort of the winners and losers of these experiences, and what people find the most useful. I do see a question in the chat that how confident should we be that Notebook LLM provides accurate info? Does it always supply sources? Did you have to double check all the info it provide to meet WSA standards? And maybe that's a segue into how careful you have to be with these tools, right? And so for me, my experience with Notebook LLM is that it is more accurate than, say, if I just use Gemini on its own. I've actually, and we had this discussion like a couple of weeks ago in our Slack channel at the Journal, that if you try to transcribe through Gemini, it can make up stuff or hallucinate. But generally, if you put it in Notebook LLM, because it's sourcing just from what you're putting into it, I found it to be always accurate or almost always accurate. With that said, there's nothing that I do with Gen AI that I don't double check. So if I ask my Notebook LLM to find a certain quote for a story, I will always go back in my transcription, in my like recording of it, and make sure that that person actually said that. And I will always independently, fact check whatever Notebook LLM or Gemini is telling me. And that's sort of like, sort of getting up to sort of Wall Street Journal standards. But also, I think that, part of doing that too is even though, because Notebook LLM will also, like, I've used Notebook LLM to fact check as well, like stories, but then I'll also independently fact check. And I think for me, it still feels like it saves time from if I had just done everything myself, like in terms of like building out stories and finding quotes. I found that Notebook LLM just speeds things up. But I never use any of these tools without just independently fact checking it myself. And that's obviously one of the, sort of one of the safeguards that you have to keep in mind as you're using these tools.
Great.
Jeff, could I jump in? And
Yeah.
because I really do feel I feel very strongly about being cautious and even a little bit skeptical of generative AI specifically, because at ICIJ, as you know, we are a very small NGO, but part of the work we do is very tech focused, and we have a tech team that has been working on machine learning from like decades. And so we have created DataShare, which is this software where journalists can upload their leaked documents, sensitive documents, in a safe manner, and it'll help them analyze them easier, index them, etc. Keep in mind, this is a tool that has been existed for many, many years before the boom in generative AI, but it's very heavy. it's a very heavy tool because it's heavily encrypted, because it's so safe. And for me personally, there's a lot of force in the use of these more open sources, online sources, such as the Gemini, Pinpoint, Google tools. And so I never and will never look. It's simply not, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't know if I'm being paranoid or if this is good practice in general, but this is my policy. If this is the document that has been leaked, I will never expose it to one of the open source tools or the online tools. So that's one caution that I think journalists should take. The second one is accuracy, which is I already talked about, and Sebastian also mentioned. Like, if you want to use it for fact checking or find something accurate, you need to triple check, because that can't be your one way that you do it. And the third way in which I'm very cautious is, to me, the most interesting, because it's really like a battle with our own kind of humanity. When you're doing a large project, an investigation, or just a really in-depth reported business story, your editor will tell you you have to become an expert on that. If your story is about a natural gas company, then you have to become an expert in the natural gas markets and how they work, right? And that takes time. And I think AI can give us the illusion that we've become experts so quickly, because it can just give us the answers. To me, that's a risk. And I think journalists should always be in the practice of making sure that you're understanding something with a human expert on it. If AI explains something to you in a way that you think is simple enough, and therefore you think you understand it, check with an expert first. So these are some of the ways that I'm very, very cautious. And I think that everyone should be very cautious at this point.
Yeah, it's a great example. I have a recent example I was just very briefly say, where I was trying to figure out who was the payment processor for a company, and I went to ChatGPT. We have the enterprise version, and asked, how can I figure this out? And they directed me to ways to look at the code on the back end, and it was really cool. I was like, wow, this is awesome. And it got me to a company that is almost like a payment processor, but was not. It was doing, kind of orchestration. And so ultimately it was wrong. But it was helpful in getting me closer, because then I was able to go to an expert and say, hey, this is what ChatGPT told me. And I reached out to a CEO, and they did their own checks and figured it out for me. Anyway, but I absolutely have experienced that, and it's a great watch out for people.
And I should mention, I at the Journal, we have Gemini Pro, like an enterprise version. So that's in terms of like work stuff, that's how I use it. I don't really use like personal ChatGPT account or whatever for my work stuff. And so while some of these tools are free, I like Notebook LLM, there's a free version of it. I don't know how I'd feel if I didn't sort of have a pro account through my work, like in terms of using some of this stuff. And so I think, it's sort of like a personal judgment call that people make, but I should mention for context, yeah, when I'm talking about Notebook LLM or Gemini, I'm going through our workplace enterprise account.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mongo, do you by chance know the privacy differences between the free versions and like, my understanding is the enterprise versions, they don't use your data to train their model, so it shouldn't leave the confines of your company's kind of database. But
Yeah, it's a little bit it's a little bit complicated to answer that. It's exactly because it also varies by, like, there are regulations by country. So as I mentioned, I would share the links. But yeah, like when you are with the pro accounts, like none of your prompts or your materials are going to be used for training the models. And when you are using Pinpoint has that no matter what. Is Canvas available for free? Yes. I see like some of the questions. Sorry. But yeah, I will provide all the links because I think it's like very important for everyone. I see that there are some people also from Canada log in, and so I think it's important just like to yeah, that you can see those differences. And I wanted to add, so I think something that is very, very important from my perspective, first as as a former investigative data editor, it's also like we definitely have to do our due diligence related to the tools. And I think that's very important. And I think like all what has been said for me, and I like to mention this, is just like when we are using new tools, like we have to be very clear in what is not under negotiation from the quality of our work. And I think that for me that speaks like to everything, right? Like what is the value of the information that we are providing, the accuracy, like how like are we using tools? Like I think that we can think of the tools that make our work a little bit faster, that we can automate some processes so we can dedicate more time to talking with people instead of like doing like a scraping of a daily newsletter from or a daily release of information from a public office. It's just like understanding what, but just like what is not under negotiation of what we do as journalists. And I think that that's very important. And the other thing is just like for what I was mentioning earlier, is just like for what stage are we using it, right? Like maybe I'm in the pre-reporting. I mean, like the exploratory. I'm just like fishing and just like trying to find something, or I want to be. I now have more information, and I want to go be very specific. I think Isabella has like really good recommendations in how does she build her prompts to get the quality of the information that she's really looking into, and then how you escalate what you are working on and how you're going to use the tool for that, as Sebastian was mentioning with the fact-checking process. And I think, like in my experience, and I repeat, that has been in the past for me, and how I always recommend is just like nothing goes unchecked. I think like as simple as in the I have worked in investigative journalism for a long time, and the rule is like nothing goes unchecked. And I think there's like how does that translate to how we are doing the work, our work, and just like trying to bring that to the standards of our organizations when they have them, or when they are just starting to build them up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to answer one of the questions that was
I was thinking I know there's several which I want to get to too. I was thinking maybe we could talk about prompt writing briefly, and then I can kind of go down the line on the questions. I was curious because prompt writing I think is, it's pretty important, especially for deep research and other queries. So I was wondering if anyone what your tips are for prompt writing, when you're writing a prompt. And Sebastian, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think, and yeah, prompt writing is sort of like a skill in itself, right? For me, what I found most useful is to keep it concise, because for me, I found that if I ask a pretty concise question instead of some super generalized question, I can always follow up with other questions afterwards, and it's sort of to really nail it down. So I usually write something like, I use Gemini Pro mostly. I usually say something like, I'm a WSA reporter doing a story, for example, on AI agents. What researchers have studied this? Who has been quoted on this before, and sort of to get a lay of the land of kind of what's out there. Or a couple of weeks ago, for example, I was doing a pretty quick turnaround story on software companies, and basically like if they were in trouble because of AI, because a lot of the market thinks they are, and I've was curious what sort of existed out there of people who had talked about vibe coding their own software basically, and it sort of helped me to sort of identify well, what people had written about this. So for me, I usually, identify who I am, like what, then I'm a reporter. I'm, looking for something specifically in terms of like either specific sources that I might be trying to find or a specific research point. And then if it doesn't sort of pull up what I'm looking for at first, I always just sort of, ask follow-up questions. But definitely curious from like Mago and others, like what they've found helpful.
Mago, do you want to? All right, I'll just say mine really briefly about prompt writing. This is going to sound insane. Please, nobody quote me on this. But sometimes I approach Gemini as if I'm asking the question to like my boomer parents. I mean, just because it's like I want to be very specific about what exactly it is that I'm looking for and what are my sources. I'm not going to tell them why I want these sources, but it's almost kind of like implied. I've gotten to the point with my account where it responds like, since you always like these types of sources, here is my answer. And so that's in simply put, this is my approach. I often think about my prompts that way. My prompts tend to be long. And I really craft them well. And I find that it's just better and easier for me, at least. I guess it's almost a communication style that we're all going to have that is going to vary. But I think the key is to practice a lot and until you find like your particular sweet spot, I think.
Margot, yeah, what would you
Yeah,
say?
yeah, and I will say, I will say it's also I go back to the same. It's just like, for what are you prompting? Like if you are for an exploratory trip, for like finding something very specific, or already navigating and this, like I have a data set, a set of documents. I already know what they have. I'm probably gonna prompt and gonna ask different questions if I don't know what these documents are about and I want to start like becoming familiar with that. I will give and this is from the trainings that we do, like what we call like 6 elements that can be very helpful. So the principal thing when you are prompting is giving a task, right? Like what is the action that you're looking for? And the others have been already mentioned in these examples, but I'm just gonna give like what would be the categories, right? Like one is giving a persona, like I'm an investigative journalist and I'm looking for these, or act as as a senior researcher for this and this and this. That could be, so providing a persona, providing a context. Isabella mentioned that, like an audience, so that's another element. I can also ask a format. Give me the response in bullet points. Give me the response in a table. So we can also ask for that, and we can also set restrictions, right? I don't want to see any responses from X or Y, or like this type of resources. Like I just want you to concentrate in these. So those are the elements, and of course I think that the most important is to having the task. The persona is really important. Context and restriction and restrictions, but audience and format are just like a little bit more mobile. And I have I'm gonna use this word, but I'm not that much really. Like sometimes when I feel a little bit lazy because I do most of my work in English and I interact with the tools in English, but English is my second language. So sometimes there's so much my brain is working. So I actually use Gemini to improve my prompts. And I said, like, I want to ask about this. And I have had like a really amazing resource help. And of course, I can edit those improvements in the prompt, and I can make decisions. There's another feature in Gemini that I really, really like. It hasn't been mentioned, that is called Gemini Gems. That is like when you want to repeat a task, and you build a prompt and you run the same prompt over and over and over with different elements. For example, let's say that I like to check annual reports, corporate like annual reports from companies that are in the stock market, right? They're public companies. So I want to, every time I see an annual report, I want to know what are they saying about financial risks. Maybe I'm looking into companies that are in like from different sectors, and all I want to know is about financial risk. So I can build a prompt with Gemini Gems and just provide the annual report. It doesn't matter which one, but and it will repeat the same prompt to these all documents over and over. And there you can, as building the prompt, even you can use Gemini to improve that prompt, or Gemini Gem automatically when you are writing it, it can help you to improve your prompt. And of course you can edit. And I have been finding those tools very helpful. And I think like sometimes it was asked, it's in one of the questions, it's just like the brainstorming, using the Gen AI tools for the brainstorming, I think can be in many levels, right? Like one is, what type of information, like I'm going to give an example. I built a notebook LM, a notebook in Notebook LM about, if you remember, the drunk raccoon that was found next to a toilet. I don't know if you remember, this happened at the end of the, I think it was at the end of the autumn. There was this drunk raccoon that crashed a liquor store, and they found him in the next to the toilet, absolutely drunk. And I did research within Notebook LM. I was looking for an example, like, to be honest, and I'm gonna walk you through everything I did. It's just like I was using this as an example of a trend, of how we can use Notebook LM for a trending story or breaking news. But I mean, it's more a trending story, not a breaking news. And Notebook LM gave me, this is the brainstorming, the first suggestion, like when they did the research and uploaded the document, and I approved the research and I uploaded the documents, the first prompt question that it suggested me, it was, what is the best way to humanely treat these animals? And that was super interesting, right? Because it was a funny story that was trending, and just like how, like, I'm just mentioning this as an example of finding, like, brainstorming. Sometimes we think that we know, just looking for a specific type of facts, when there could be something else to understand certain circumstances. So I think there's, just in terms of the brainstorming, this is like a funny story, but I think it's just like the possibilities are like what depends on what we are bringing to the tools, I think.
Yeah.
Jeff, could I respond to Catherine asks for clarification on if we put specific names of sources.
Sure.
Sometimes I do. Most of the time what I do is I use words like please only includes journalistic sources, like from legacy media or traditional media, like if that's the kind of information I want. Sometimes I say I only want science-backed information, therefore show me your sources of peer-reviewed articles. Sometimes I mean, the exclusion of social media posts works very well for me. And sometimes I'm very specific about, please only use sources from government press releases or official press releases from whatever company. So that kind of, I don't usually say like only X outlet information, but I'm very specific about the type of outlets that I ask for. I hope that helps, Catherine.
Yeah, for me, I'm sort of kind of specific in that way, in terms of like is there certain researchers that have studied, XYZ subject that I should be aware about? And even for me, sometimes a lot of this stuff is like a starting point, and maybe I look into some, professor who studied whatever I'm looking at Stanford, and maybe I go to him, and then he points me to other people. So it's sort of, it's not like I'm like being like super specific, but I'm being specific enough to where it's like a starting basis of people who are just knowledgeable about whatever topic I'm getting into.
Great. So yeah, I'm gonna there have been a lot of great questions here, which you guys have answered some, which is great, and I'm gonna go through and make sure we get to as many as we can. So I think we covered the first one. The second one, in terms of privacy, how do you all manage concerns about privacy of certain tools? I think Sebastian, you said you're really comfortable using the pro versions only if you're anything you'd add to that, and anyone else to add to that about the privacy of using these tools?
Sometimes I'm very, very paranoid and I use burner Gmail accounts to research sensitive topics that I don't want to be tied to my Google history. And I know that, it's not being just because I'm extra paranoid. Sometimes I do that. I don't even know if that's good practice, but sometimes I do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's situations like, for example, there's sometimes I'll get like embargoed news releases, right? From companies. I don't put those into the Gen AI services. And actually, I think there's supposed to be a firewall between, what I put into it and sort of where it can go. But out of an abundance of cautions, for example, in those situations, I won't you know, take the document and ask Gemini to summarize it for me. Maybe others do, but I with certain situations, there's certain judgment calls like that, and I tend to obviously go to the more conservative side.
Great. In terms of, okay, next question. Um, any tips on prompts during research phase to keep the LMs more real? I find they try to agree with me too much, end up spending more time fact checking the AI. Tricky part is it mixes facts with fiction. So anything, yeah, to keep, I personally will always include in my prompts, maintain a high standard for accuracy. I don't know if that's effective or not, but I do that. Anyone else have any tips for that?
I think like if you are using it for research, if you have a like you can choose the mod, like if you're working with Gemini, for example, I always just like I would prefer to use deep research, and the other if I can choose the model because you can feel like the fast versus thinking. And I think that is also an indication. Like if you are looking for a fast response, it's like um, I think like even when we're looking for fast responses, like we can decide like does this needs to go through generative AI or not? Like we can also even decide that, right? Like but I would say like choose thinking or pro. And that's also very, very helpful in addition to what has been mentioned. And when you are working, what Sebastian and Isabella were saying about using Notebook LM and Pinpoint, these two tools are like what we call source grounded. Like they work, and the prompting goes only to the sources that you trust and that are in the collection of documents that you have. And one thing that happens is when you start asking and you get responses, you are gonna get I'm sorry, I can share the screen, but numbers, and basically it is indicating it's gonna take you to where in the document, like the Gemini would respond within these tools, right? The chatbot is gonna give you a response, and a sentence we have a number 1, 2, 3, or 3, 4, 5, whatever. And what that number is doing is if you click there, is taking you to the original document that helped to build that part of the answer that you're getting. And this is like, as we say, like nothing goes unchecked, but this is helping you to create a shortcut in the answer, and just like understanding how the tools can work on your favor. I think that I will add that too.
Okay. Another question. Our company has strict rules on which tools we can and can't use. How do we manage those constraints while still trying to leverage these tools as we're being encouraged to?
Maybe I can, because there's also a kind of similar question about basically, do you tell the public that you're using these tools for research purposes? Do you disclose that? I think one of the questions for Wall Street Journal readers. And so my answer to that is we have our own sort of standards and rules inside the Wall Street Journal of how we can use these tools. We don't disclose sort of like that we've used, for example, Notebook LM for research purposes of the article. And I think part of that is like if you take NotebookLM or Gemini, Gemini is sort of like a souped up version of Google search, right? And a lot of it's for just like basically brainstorming and maybe source finding and things like that. And the NotebookLM, it's just you're just sourcing from what you put into it. So that's not something that we, I think as a policy disclose. But we do have our own, rules and standards of how we can use this. And obviously, like one of the clearest ones is like we don't use it for writing in any way. And that's something that I definitely wanted to bring up on this call because as you can hear from like Isabella and me, like there's a healthy amount of skepticism here, which I think is good because there's certain tools of our trade that I don't think we should hand over to AI either as an official policy like we have at the journal or just in practice. And so for us and for me personally, like writing is like one of the things that's like I'm just I'm not going to hand over ever to AI, and I think it's one of those sacred sort of parts of our crafts that we have. And I say that because I know there's also students on this call, and it's important. There's certain things as a journalist that you can never replace with AI, right? And so like working through the drafts and having 6, 7 versions of a draft and really working on the writing is one of those things, right? Obviously talking to humans and doing your own due diligence of talking to actual experts and not just relying on Google Gemini to be your expert is really important. Like I, as a Wall Street Journal reporter, some of these things are useful for, my workflows, but it's never going to replace picking up the phone and talking to the, employees at a company or executives or authoritative sources, and then just sitting down and going through the writing. And so I think you have to sort of have your own personal standards for it. And then also companies will have their own personal standards. But for us at the Journal, yeah, we have our own sort of rules and regulations of how we use this stuff. And a primary example being with the writing is we do it all ourselves. Our editors edit all the writing, just like it's been done for decades, hundreds of years. And so that's sort of where we land on this stuff.
Great. Another question, I think we've kind of partially answered, but I'll open it up. Using AI as a research assistant to find sources. I know you guys have said you do that. Anything you'd add that we haven't covered in terms of using AI to find sources?
So I've successfully found some sources that I didn't find on a normal Google search, but I would say that it's not like, to me, that's not the function that I go to AI the most for because it doesn't really save a significant amount of time. I don't think it's I guess a more sophisticated question I've asked AI is something like when I'm looking into a specific industry, who are the buyers, just to make sure that I'm not missing any players of characters in a story, and that it's always a potential for new sources. But it's not necessarily like the most time saving for me, at least.
Okay. Last question. I cover data center developments a lot, where I run into a lot of concerns about the environmental impact of these projects. So often makes me feel conflicted about using AI as a reporter. How do you guys feel about this?
I mean, personally, I it's something that I'm definitely conscious about, and it's one of the things where everybody has sort of their different sort of practices for it. I think I try to always keep in mind when I'm using it and like is it actually beneficial toward my work right now? Is it actually accomplishing something that I could maybe accomplish in another way, especially if I'm like on deadline. Um, but yeah, the realities of this stuff is that it's messy. Like it consumes a lot of energy. And I think everybody has their different judgment calls they make. But there's I think as you see on this call, there's like I was saying earlier, there's I think a healthy amount of skepticism for it. And as we continue to see how it improves or how it might get more efficient or even maybe more energy cost efficient, uh, maybe it'll be sort of become more normalized overall. But yeah, I think it's something that's debated a lot here in the Bay Area where it's being created, and obviously elsewhere as well.
I'm sorry, Mago, if you wanted to say something, I'll be really quick because I have opinions. No, I have reflections on this. Like, I remember reading about how OpenAI was paying something like $2 an hour a day or something like that to African workers. I believe it was in Kenya to train ChatGPT, for example. And the way that I'm very aware of the environmental and socioeconomic impact of using these tools. At the same time, I think that out of all of the generative AI users out there, we are in a position of obligation and almost privilege that is different because we should be investigating these companies and exposing them, because the only thing better than the current state of generative AI is a better state of generative AI, where they are incorporating environmental policies and they are coming up with better technologies to have a lower environmental impact, and they are paying decent wages. And that's not going to happen on its own. So I think that that's a way for us to manage our own impact. We are here to look at these companies and hold them accountable and hopefully have them behave better.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess another way that I think about it a little is like the impact you can have of using these tools is at least for me, I feel like greater than the kind of positive environmental impact I would have of not using them. Another way to kind of think about it. Great. Well,
Just
go ahead,
sorry,
Maya.
I know we
Yeah,
are finishing, we're
yeah,
finalizing, but I think it's just to add to something that I said earlier. It's just like when we are doing due diligence of the tools that we're using and what is not under negotiation, I think it's just like we can have like a very like, it's important to have everything into consideration, I will say. I think it's important. And I know that sometimes like there are like tools that are, as Sebastian was mentioning, like all these, like there are services coming all over the place, boom, 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 boom. And it takes a little bit of time and work and responsibility, not only to to understand what they can do, how we can use them, and how they can improve our work and the quality of the work, and how we are thinking the journalism that we do and the impact that we want to have, etc. But I think that all these elements is what, for me, it forms part of what is not under negotiation when I'm thinking about the work and what I'm using to do it.
I should mention, because I am in Silicon Valley and I report on this stuff, I do have to use it to a degree because I'm talking to executives about the inner workings of ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot. So to a degree, I'm using, it creates my knowledge base as I'm questioning sources or executives over it. And I think that's one of the things about being a journalist, right? Is that for better or worse, you have to sort of understand these new technologies or understand the world as deeply as you can. To Isabella's point, so that you can be smart and sort of like when you're having these discussions with people that are creating this technology, for example. And so, yeah.
great. All right. Well, we're at time here. Thank you so much, everyone, to our fantastic panelists. This was a great discussion, and to everyone who joined, we'll be sending out a PDF with a list of some of the tools. We're just going to put some of those together, and I'll send those out over email. And if anyone is ever interested in getting involved in our task force or reaching out to any of us, please feel free. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.